There are a number of insight tools for psychoanalysts. You might think of it as a little toolbox. Little things that they may or may not pull out during therapy to try to create an environment that would make it more likely that the unconscious would give up some interesting piece of information. So the insight tools are ways to get at more direct ways of trying to get at the content of the unconscious. In other words, the unconscious is always leaking out, but to provide it with a optimal avenue to do so. Okay, and one of those techniques is called free association. Okay, and you could do this with anybody. Right now, you could jot down 5 just random words on a piece of paper and have somebody else do the same thing. Okay, and then take turns without looking at the other person's words. Each one would read them to the other one, but just pause for a second after each one. Very, very quickly, just a second, and you have to respond with the first word in your mind. So they read their 5, you respond to them, and then you read your 5, and they respond to yours. Do you think you could learn anything about somebody by the first responses to these words? Well, the idea here, is, and this is just one example, but the idea here is that if you must respond very, very quickly, that you're not going to have time to censor that information. In other words, the ego, which, is privy to more than you are as far as information in the unconscious and wanting to keep that unconscious, is trying to always work and censor information. But just like we said, the more relaxed you get, the more likely that things in the unconscious will leak out. If you're on guard, they are less likely to. So the idea with free association is to come up with, if somebody said father and the client said beating, it's valuable information, right? Really valuable information for the therapist. But to see, the therapist can choose the words carefully to see what kind of associations a client has with that. But by making them respond so quickly, hopefully before there's any censoring that goes on there, and it's not like the client would purposely censor this usually, but it's being censored from themselves. You're trying to overcome that. Okay. Another avenue in which the unconscious often leaks out is in dreams. Now, Freudian dream analysis is pretty sexual. And it is interesting, and there's, again, some weak research correlations here. And possibly was stronger if we could have had this kind of research methodology in Freud's time. We might have come up with at least somewhat stronger correlations. What the research suggests now is what he's talking about can go on and does go on sometimes as symbolism in your dreams, but maybe not all the time, like you thought, probably not. Let's talk about Freud's dream analysis, Freud thought, now remember that, he was practicing during the Victorian era, and this was a period of time when people really repressed sexuality, sexual thoughts, all of this pushed down in the unconscious, meaning that, he would run into a lot more clients than what you might run into today when this is more openly discussed. Clients who have issues in this regard. So Freud's dream analysis is very much based around sex, and he felt that the main purpose of dreaming was sexual wish fulfillment. And yet, that the unconscious is a way for the brain to fool the brain. That's a really interesting way to think about it, right? It's like, how can the brain fool the brain? But, it's a way that the brain can tuck things away and protect you from it, at least your conscious knowledge of it, even though it still affects your behavior and thought processes. Okay, it's kind of like a benevolent dictator. He thinks they're doing the best thing for you. And, but, you know, this means that for your dreams to be able to work as wish fulfillment, they can't be, you know, too easy for you to figure out. They really have to be hidden in symbolism, the wish fulfillment, sexuality part of it, your dreams. Okay? So Freud thought that basically anything that was long and cylindrical in a dream was symbolic for a penis. So that's one example of dream analysis, how dream analysis symbols work in his theory. And he felt that anything that resembled an opening in your dreams, you know, was actually symbolic for a vagina. And imagine if you were going to a Freudian therapist and they were trying to tell you this, right? And you come in the next time and they say, what was your last dream about? And you're going, hey, it is nothing to do about sex. Totally innocent dream. And they're like, well, what did you dream? You say, well, I was changing the oil in a car. And the Freudian therapist would go, right. Because they would be thinking that the dipstick was symbolic for a penis and that the oil shaft was symbolic for a vagina. And they might very well respond with something like this. But what I'm really interested in knowing is, whose car was this, right? Anyway, let me tell you something. If you're really interested in dream analysis, I would suggest Carl Jung. We're going to look at him a little bit later today, although we're not going to go into his dream analysis, which is not that relevant to personality psychology. But as a form of study, that it would be more relevant, in my opinion, today. I think that you would find his very fascinating, and you can look that up and read about it in your university library. Freudian slips, yet another way of getting at the unconscious. Freud thought, just like he thought there was no such thing as an innocent dream, he did not feel that mistakes like slip of the tongue, saying the wrong word, he didn't feel that they were innocent. He felt that they were also sexually motivated, kind of sexual wish fulfillment, or just a reflection of this underlying sexual issues in the unconscious, you know, or this underlying fascination with sex, you know, as the libido being the driving force in his theory of the unconscious. And, you know, what's interesting is if you look at when people slip up and get the wrong word, of course, it's not always a sexual word that they mix it up with, but sometimes it is. And in fact, in this last presidential election, there was a newspaper reporter who was reporting live on the scene who said erection instead of election and got a lot of slack for that, right? People kept teasing this person about that for a long time. Yet another way of getting to the unconscious you already know about, and that is projective tests. So here's a good little review question for you. What is the name of the projective test that is the most popular and the most reliable and valid with most of the population? If you said Rorschach test, you are absolutely correct. Okay, and what is the name of the one that is actually a little more valid and reliable, but only with people who express themselves really well in creative writing? If you said TAT, or thematic apperception test, you are right on the nose. Okay, now a final way of getting to the unconscious is hypnosis. Okay, again, you know, the more relaxed you are, the less on guard, the less censoring that will occur, and the more that will leak out of the unconscious. And how more relaxed can you be than when you are actually hypnotized? Okay. Unfortunately, only about 10% of the population is hypnotizable. Okay? And actually, the very best predictor for that, for figuring out who is and who isn't, who are those 10%, right, is a personality trait, a scale, a score on a personality measure. And the personality trait being measured is called absorption. Absorption. So what I want you to do now is to get out your self-assessment sheet. Okay? So you all did as homework for this lecture 2 questionnaires, questionnaire 1 and questionnaire 2, and you filled in that information on your self-assessment sheet. In other words, you filled in your score, okay? And you want to pull that out and look at your score for questionnaire 1. You may now fill in the name blank there with the word absorption, absorption, absorption. So that was a personality measure for one single personality trait, obviously with its such short form, right? And that trait is absorption. And now I'm going to give you a way to interpret that, because you can interpret that in light of other ASU students who have taken personality psychology in the past. So we have that mean, and you can see if you are above the mean or below the mean or somewhere pretty close to the mean, right? That mean is 122.5. Now, the possible range of scores on this measure goes from 39, that's the lowest 34 is the lowest score that you can get, all the way up to 238, okay? And the mean for ASU students who have taken personality psychology is 122.5. Now, that's one way to interpret it. Let me give you another way. If your score is close to 200 or above that, then it is highly likely that you are hypnotizable.